Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 41st episode of 2023. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, and our gold sponsor, Network Connects. Today, I'm in Mexico City for day 2 of the Fiber Broadband Association's Latin America Fiber Connect event. We had a great crowd of just over 800 delegates yesterday, and it's exciting to see how the industry is working to connect every home in Latin America with fiber. It's just really exciting down here. In Washington, D.C., the Fiber Broadband Association, along with most everybody else, is watching what happens in the House of Representatives. The House needs a speaker, and until one's elected, legislation cannot be passed. Additionally, the short-term budget runs out on November 17th, so there's a lot to accomplish in a short period of time in Washington. Later today, Wednesday, October 11th, say the 10th, October 10th, from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, please join the Fiber Broadband Association and NTCA for our joint webinar, Internet for All, Getting BEAD Right Now, an overview of FBA and NTCA's Playbook 3.0 on BEAD implementation. Over the past few months, FBA and NTCA has released modules from their Playbook 3.0 that provides deep dives on key aspects of what states will need to tackle in their initial proposals. The most important webinar will discuss topics covering in Playbook 3.0 and beyond, including the extremely high cost threshold, the letter of credit, affordability, and much more. Our next and final Regional Fiber Connect workshop for 2023 will be in Minneapolis on October 24th. So that's 2 weeks. Registration for this event has been great, and we look forward to seeing everybody in Minneapolis. So please, you don't want to miss it, and register today. That brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session with our good friend and strategic partner, Mike Render, the principal of RVA Research, who's here to discuss his latest research, which reveals that fiber is preferred by nearly 2/3 of all internet users. But before I formally introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us this morning. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to once again thank the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco, and our gold sponsor, Network Connects. Now, if you'd all keep in mind that you're in listen mode only, to ask a question, you can type it into the question box located within your control panel on the right side of your computer screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a minute to do that. We really appreciate your input. Now I'll pass it back to Gary to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary.
Thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we had the pleasure of hearing from Brian Darr from UCLA, who discussed crowdsourced data and the BEAD state challenge process. For the NTI BEAD model challenge process, the states can use pre-approved modules from NTI, or they can develop their own challenge process. Brian did a great job of walking us through the options for leveraging crowdsourced data. So if you missed it, you can watch the replay on the Fiber Broadband Association's website or listen to the podcast. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is our good friend and strategic partner, Mike Render, the principal of RVA Research, who's here to discuss his latest research, which reveals that fiber is preferred by nearly 2/3 of all internet users. Mike is the CEO and principal analyst at RVA Market Research and Consulting, based in Tulsa. Mike has been a strategic partner with FBA since 2002 and is generally known as North America's premier market research expert tracking fiber optic broadband deployment and consumer attitudes towards broadband. He has assisted some of the world's largest telecom corporations, individual communities, and the FCC. So welcome, Mike, and for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work them into the Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Great, thanks, Gary. Good to be here. And yes, I'm excited to talk about this week's topic. We have have conducted a consumer survey with the FBA since 2007, one of the longest running surveys. And so this is kind of the focus of this one. We focus on different things in different surveys, and of course can't report it all, but we're really focused on the interest in broadband and the mind share of people towards different types of broadband. Next slide. Next one. I guess we do have transitions there, Trish. So this is showing the overall interest in broadband as being very important. Unfortunately, we only tracked that since 2019, but you can see it's increased from 60% to 75% in just a short period of time, up a little bit during the pandemic and a little dip there after the pandemic, but generally an upward trend. People just see broadband or high quality internet as extremely important in their lives and increasing over time. Next slide. And, you know, contrary to someone's opinions, we're certainly not done with what the internet and broadband can do. Perhaps someone in this call is thinking about some things that nobody's ever thought about that'll be a real milestone coming up. But here we're looking at some general ideas, and we ask people what's important. And you can see, you know, things like medical, better interaction and vital checking, independence, helping seniors stay at home, safety, things like notification of humans in the property area, more realistic online education. All these things, there's a lot of room for more growth and more interest. You know, even some far out ones, they're inhabiting an avatar robot, you know, being able to play ball with your grandchild, or seeing an elderly mother, father across the country, whatever. But, you know, who knows what'll happen, but all these things are possible. And the more these happen, the more bandwidth is needed. On the right side, down at the bottom, you can see that interest differs a little bit by males and females and age group. You know, generally a little bit less interest as age increases. But for example, for certain things like, you know, living at home, female 65 plus is the highest interest. So it relates to both general acumen with broadband, but also the need that people have. But a lot of things still coming. Next slide. And, you know, we ask people every few years about what's important when you buy a new home. And this time, you know, the basic needs are there. Laundry room always comes up number one. Very high speed broadband is number two. You know, it beats hardwood floors and great kitchen granite and all those things. It's just important to your life when you're looking at in a new home. And as you know, Wi-Fi is an interesting factor as well. So broadband is obviously shown by this to be very important to people. And the next slide, I think we talk about the use in MDUs. And here we are looking at, you know, multi-dwelling units, apartments, condominiums, same kind of thing. You know, in this case, it's not a full laundry room, but at least a washer and dryer in the unit, very important. Second, again, very high-speed, reliable broadband. You know, more important than good parking, soundproof walls, storage space. It's just very important to people's lives today. Next slide. And the next slide, we're talking about now what's the real impact of fiber. This is a quick review of last year's presentation, where we really showed all the benefits, the true ways that fiber beats all the competition. You know, we take speed tests during the survey, which actually gives us probably the only random sample of survey that we can compare to other methods that may be out there. So you can see that when we compare upload speeds, download speeds, net promoter scores, latency, cost per megabit, reported outages, reliability, everything in every category, fiber beats. You know, cable is usually the second one, and of course DSL and wireless and so forth. Next slide. And last year, and you can look this up on the FDA's website if you want to dig deeper, but we showed that there's statistically different impacts, you know, enough difference to make it statistically reliable for things like sustainability, entrepreneurship, working, home-based businesses, migration, income, health and education, particularly for people in lower income categories, having good broadband made a recognizable difference in all these things. So feel free to dive into that more if you want to look at last year's results. Next slide. And here we're going to go into the mind share. What is the current position of fiber versus other things in people's minds? And to start out, we looked at the gain or loss in market share over the last 2 years, where people said, yes, I changed my my internet, I had to move, or I just got tired of the old one, I needed a change. So we're looking at who won and who lost in that transition. Fiber, we had the net change of 15 points. Wireless was second. Wireless has enjoyed an uptick in the last couple of years because of 5G and some better results, and particularly for people that just don't have much of anything, getting it's nothing like fiber, but if you can get a 20 megabit signal or a 50 megabit and you've had 2 megabits before, it's a reason to move. DSL, not as much change. There isn't as much of it out there, and much of that is in the rural areas that's left. Cable modem had the most decrease at 14%, being taken mostly by both fiber and wireless. But so again, evidence that fiber is winning, even though, think about it, fiber is only available in to less than half the country. So despite that, fiber is still winning. Next slide. Here's market share over time as we've tracked it from these studies. You can look at different areas. Some of you have seen this chart before, but we're adding the latest data. Dial-up era in the early 2000s, 1900s, and 1990s. You can see it won, but it started going down rapidly, and cable and DSL together both were neck and neck until about 2008. They both provided enough bandwidth, and then cable DSL couldn't keep up. Smaller pipe to get the bandwidth through. It couldn't keep up. Cable started winning and started gaining share all the way till about 2014 or 15. Meanwhile, fiber, it's not widely available. It's not as easy to get it to everybody as cable and DSL was, but it's slowly being built out to the whole nation. And as it is, you can see it continues to grow in market share. The cable is starting to dip. Next slide. And fiber, about every 3 or 4 years, we ask about home value. And if you had 2 homes that you could purchase, you loved them both, but one had fiber, the other didn't, how much would the non-fiber home have to be discounted? And as you can see, for a single family home, about almost 5%, which is really the highest number we've seen. There's always a little bit of error in statistical error in market research, of course, but by far the highest, generally it's been down in the 3% range. So people are seeing that it's important, and they're willing to pay some extra price. In many cases, even knowing that at some point they may be able to get fiber. MDU users who are younger and are thinking only about the next year or so, even more important, 13% difference in price willing to be paid. And we've seen some other backups of these data from actual assessed values and so forth, that this general difference does exist. Next slide. And here's a question that unfortunately we haven't asked all these years, so it can't really be tracked. But fiber, when we ask what's the best method of all, 63%, nearly 2/3 of everyone says fiber. Cable is second, fixed wireless is third. This is, people might ask, well, why doesn't everyone think fiber? Well, obviously other competition is trying to say, well, we have a gigabit too, or we have just as much capability. So it gets confusing to the consumer out there, but the consumer is quickly catching on. Interestingly, we did ask this question about 4 years ago once, and 5G wireless won. This was in the period when when there was all this hype about 5G and no one had it yet. 5G was going to solve every problem the world ever had and be by far the best. And that, of course, was 5G is better than 4G, but it's no panacea. So 5G fiber is number one. And the right-hand side, you can see by their current delivery. And the people that have experienced fiber, competitive providers are mostly fiber, rural electrics are mostly fiber, small telcos are mostly fiber. You can see the highest preference to fiber. Then it drops off a bit. But even large MSOs over in the second from the right, 54%, a majority, think fiber is better. It's only 36% said cable modem, and a few other also RANs. So fiber is just gaining the reputation, deservedly so, as we saw from the performance, as the very best performance method. Next slide. And really trying to sum this up, fiber share's never been higher, and this matters. How do we know this? We know it from the greatest movement from fiber while churning. We know it from the real estate premiums that we saw, and the greatest percent calling fiber best. So the consumer is getting it. And this really matters because the market share move to fiber will probably be faster and deeper than most expect. It's obviously going to happen to some extent because of the increasing build that fiber is going to enjoy over the next year. And typically when we have those builds, market share, not market share, but at least the take rates for fiber actually drops a bit because it takes a while to everybody to move to fiber. But people are also anecdotally telling us that they've never seen getting to their first 20% of take rates faster than it's happening currently. So, we expect that the share take was going to happen fairly quickly. MSOs and cable companies don't move to fiber, are more vulnerable than most expect. DOCSIS 4.0, which is said to be coming starting late this year, early next year, probably won't be sufficient. That'll be a next step in their keep to try, moves fiber deeper in many cases, but it's still coax for the last leg. Improves the upload speed somewhat, probably improves reliability somewhat, but it probably is not going to be sufficient. Already people are in the cable side are advertising gigabit, and that is just not enough to get by the reputation that fiber is gaining for. It's not just speed, it's reliability, it's latency, it's all those things. So, a lot of cable companies are moving to fiber. Many of the small players, many of the mid-sized players. I've just been announced that finally I'm going to have fiber from Cox Cable. So, cable companies are getting in the game. But the biggest ones, it's hardest for them to do that, and that's Charter and Comcast. They're steadfastly trying to hold to coax as long as they can, but I think it's going to be more difficult than they think. Finally, rare exceptions, building, with this government money, BEAD and so forth, building rural wireless or certainly satellite or something is just irresponsible. There may be mountaintops and so forth that there's a reason to get fiber closer, but not all the way. But generally, even the public gets it, that it's important. If we're spending government money, we want to spend something that's going to last. When the rural electric came on board with the law and movement funding to do rural electricity, there were options. There were options of giving everybody a wind vane that would, cost less, and it might power a light in their room and maybe a radio, but it certainly wouldn't have powered everything that has happened over the next 80 years since they started the law. And they were smart to go all the way to the best solution to fiber. So, Gary, I think that's it. Just exciting to see that fiber just continues. It's not only its real performance, but its reputation as well as time goes on.
Mike, really interesting. One of the things that you didn't bring up is sustainability. That seems like that's probably a key attribute of fiber. What can you say about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, our own analysis and study has shown that it is important, and I'm actually in a working group with the association right now, looking at the current numbers, and it may be even bigger than the numbers we've shown in the past. We've got some real experts on that committee that are looking at all the active devices in a HFC network or DSL network. And of course, the HFC is the biggest competition. Just a lot of powered devices between the central office and your home. And all those use energy, all those have reliability problems. They're called truck rolls. So fiber really does have an impact in terms of sustainability. And
Yeah, I think you had you had said that if when we get fiber to everyone's home, that will provide reduced carbon footprint equivalent to taking 11 million cars off the road every year. Is that right?
Yeah, that was our analysis last year, and we'll take a look at that. That was also using the impacts of not only direct impacts, but the fact that better performance allows more people to work from home, which means less commuting time, even considering more energy use at home and so forth. So big impacts, and the Fiber Broadband Association should have some important inputs and announcements on that in the coming months.
So some of our audience, we have a lot of audience questions, mostly about fiber versus cable. And so in your chart, you're showing that cable is losing market share. You've showed that in a couple of different charts. You showed that cable lost 14 points of market share against fiber here in the last 2 years. What the question is, when do you think that fiber will overtake cable?
I haven't actually projected that. By the way, the 14% is only on those who've switched, those churned in the last 4 years. The actual overall percentage is more like a point or two. But, I would think, if you just look at that chart and trend it out and assume some gain, it's somewhere in the next decade, certainly, maybe 7 years. I haven't actually thought about that, but good question.
So
we'll have some more inputs.
Yeah, one of the questions that came in from the cable industry is when you showed your upstream and downstream chart.
Yeah.
The question was, why is so you had upstream at fiber, you showed it like 75 meg, and then you showed downstream fiber at 200 meg. So if fiber is symmetric, why is it showing different on those two charts?
Yeah, well, there's several things. First of all, these are real world speed tests, and it depends on what plan people take. It depends on what plans are offered, and many times these speeds are run through Wi-Fi. They're going back to a point at the internet, coming back again. So real world transition. So they're not showing what's capable. And in fact, when we cross tabulate by what the person has in their home, are they using a direct Ethernet connection, you get the highest number. Then if you're dropping to a mesh network, it drops off from there. If you're using only one Wi-Fi device, especially in a big home, it drops further. So we have to really be working on how do you get the best in-home experience. I don't know totally why there's still some difference. By far, fiber does the best in upstream versus cable. Cable's way down there, still at 25 or so megabits. So there's a biggest difference you see in upstream, even more so than downstream. But the symmetrical does not always show up in our speed tests. It probably will.
So
it's getting closer over time.
When you look at your tracking, you're tracking cable like a DOCSIS versus fiber to the home, because it appears that when we look at any study that cable or MSOs are deploying more fiber than anybody. All their new builds are fiber to the home. Everything in a competitive area is fiber to the home. all the state grants that they're being successful in is fiber to the home. So it appears that cable is doing a great job of getting fiber to the home as everywhere they can.
Yeah, to the point I've said, I'm getting that now. And that chart is not all cable companies. It is meant to be just cable DOCSIS companies, cable modem company customers. So, you know, that share is lower than some people report because, as you mentioned, more and more cable companies are provisioning customers with fiber as time goes on.
So on your chart, you also showed net promoter scores that providers deploying fiber have the highest net promoter score. And as I recall, ISPs in general have the lowest of any net promoter score of any industry. Is that right?
Yeah, it's still, even the latest numbers I saw were right down at the bottom or second from the bottom. So yeah. And you've made the point, you know, fiber's the best of the worst, but it's important to bring that up when you have such an overwhelmingly better product as fiber does versus other types. I think it's important for all providers to get their net promoter score up based on customer service. And that's doing, you know, having the best possible, whether it's chat or whether it's human, you know, response time, it's getting people out to solve problems quickly. And frankly, it's trying to solve some of the trust problems that ISPs have had for decades, probably. You know, we've all had experiences where we sign up for unlimited bandwidth forever, and then it proves non-profitable. So you call to change your contact phone number, and you are not given that benefit anymore. So people have seen those kinds of trust issues. In fact, trust is one of the most important factors in net promoter score. So I encourage everybody that's a fiber provider, whether you're a large incumbent or a small provider, to build customer service and trust and communication beyond second to none, as well as the product.
So what also seems interesting is on your net gain or loss in market share in 2019. You know, obviously fiber was gaining 15 points of market share, so that's similar. But DSL was the biggest loser of market share, and then cable, then wireless. And so what seems like it's flipped in the last couple of years is that wireless is gaining market share and cable is losing more market share, and DSL is having less impact. And you said that's because there's not much DSL out there, or at least the people that are moving.
Yeah, the base is smaller and gets smaller all the time. Plus, a lot of that base is still out in rural areas where, you know, it'll be attacked by the fiber from the BEAD program and the government programs. So probably a little bit less than you know. I was a little surprised at first. Why wasn't DSL higher in loss? But you know, you think about where fiber is being built. It's being built in cable areas. It's being built to compete with the, you know, people that really want good broadband. So it's cable is lost. Now, obviously, the better cable, the DOCSIS 3.1 and deep fiber cable is doing better than rural cable or low community cable. In our community, I said Cox is coming. They're actually overbuilding another cable company. So it's interesting that the fiber competition is going on.
Well, Mike, you always have so much great information. I'm super excited for your fiber deployment study coming out later this year. That's going to be awesome. It sounds like that fiber's on track for another record year, despite you know, the inventory drawdown issues that we've seen some of the suppliers face. But as far as deployment, it looks like it's rock solid. Is that right?
Yeah, we don't have the final numbers yet, but yeah, you know, we had already discounted some of the exuberance that people had. We still expect an increase from last year and record territory, we believe, at this point.
Another record year. Well, Mike, you're a great strategic partner for FBA, so thank you very much, and we really appreciate all your research and insights on the fiber industry. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. It's our second episode of the Quantum series, so as one of the things that having a fiber network enables you to really move into the quantum age. And so we are having a series once a month talking about a quantum topic. And next week we'll be joined by Nicole Barbaras, the technical director at GTM. She's going to be talking about quantum computing power. So you're not going to want to miss that. Super interesting, and appreciate you guys joining us today. We'll see you guys next week.